I'm Sarah Holbrook, the Executive Director of the Pinhead Institute, and the lucky interviewer for the Mayoral Update with Sean Murphy. How are you, Sean?
Hi, Sarah. Happy May. How are you?
I know, it's May already, isn't it?
It is, I know.
Did you do something for Cinco de Mayo?
No, I had a very low-key, non-holiday. It's not a real holiday anyway.
No, and apparently it isn't even a holiday at all in Mexico.
I think it's basically a beer industry.
Yeah, that's what they said, kind of like Mother's Day and Hallmark or something
like a Hallmark
that.
card holiday. Yeah,
exactly.
This is a beer holiday.
Yeah. Oh, Mother's Day is coming up. That'll be exciting.
Exactly.
We're going to go camping. I'm very excited about that.
Excellent.
So what are you excited about? What's going on in town?
Well, this week we actually had a couple of hot topic headlines at Town Council.
Let's talk about those.
The principal one was actually reduction and efforts that we can continue to take to reduce greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
And so the second one was really a parking discussion. Those are the real two headlines, and parking specifically on the west end, where there is not a permitted zone at this point.
Okay,
But back to the greenhouse gas discussion. You, as part of the Pinhead Institute, and certainly one of the people who's very close to the data, or at least close to the new leadership at the Pinhead Climate Institute, will know this, but for those who don't, we actually have an exciting partner now. The town is going to partner with the Pinhead Climate Institute in order to actually be better data monitors and to use the data more wisely, and also then to do the outreach that we need to do to our community. So looking backwards, as you might remember, the town since 2003, so for the past 14 years, has been actively monitoring both town government as well as the Telluride area's climate footprint, carbon footprint. And so that exercise again began in 2003. By 2009, the town council here said, you know, we'd like to commit ourselves to the goal of reducing our 2005 level of carbon output by 20% by year 2020.
And are we talking town government numbers or town of Telluride, the 2,400 people numbers?
Well, the goal applies to both, or applied to both.
Got it.
The short answer, or the quick and dirty on that, is that the town met that as of 2012. We were meeting that 20% reduction. Then as of 2014, 2015, and again this year in 2016, when you take account of the town's renewable energy certificates as well as the open space sequestration for carbon sequestration that we take account of on the valley floor, et cetera, we have actually been carbon neutral as a town government. So a lot of communities like Aspen who say they're 100% renewable, Telluride is actually in the same category. Now that's the good news. The less than great news.
And sorry, to back up just a little bit, it's not that the town government is 100% renewables, it's just that it's 100% carbon neutral, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
yes.
got it. Okay, good. Moving on.
The other, just as we did in 2009 and asked both the town government as well as our community at large to strive toward that particular reduction, we're in the same position now where we really we've shown measurable success on the government side, but as a community, our output of carbon is still greater than it was in 2005 on an absolute basis. That could be because we have more people here, more activity here, but regardless of the reason, we need to do better. So we as a town council decided that we would commit the town going forward to always be carbon neutral. And then we would also start an outreach campaign, hopefully in conjunction with partners like the Pinhead Climate Institute, to help engage individual action. And individual action is really the centerpiece of the Mountain Films New Normal. So in a few weeks, those who are lucky enough to be part of that conversation, or those who would like to tune into the May 30th, 2017 Town Council meeting, there'll be a work session with one of the leading sort of individual initiative movers and shakers from Britain. And I know you can provide his name for those who are.
You know what?
He's from
Actually,
a community called Ashton Hayes,
exactly.
Right?
I know the name of the place where he's from. Yes, and it was a citizen-led initiative to make their town carbon neutral.
So we're hoping that
and
partly
he's gonna
coming
work
out
with
of the
town.
New Normal conference that Mountain Film will be showcasing
over Memorial Day weekend.
We'll actually then kind of have a kickstart in our individual efforts, sort of on the same basis, on the same plane. Next week there's a conference in Aspen. It's a new organization of local communities like ours. About approximately 30, I think, will be in attendance. The organization is called the Compact for Colorado Communities.
I love it.
And this is really an idea that's modeled on this Compact of Mayors.
You could add the Compact for Colorado Communities Fighting Climate Change, and you'd have 5 C's in a row. Mind blown.
Well, you know what? We've already got another state organization called the CC4CA.
My goodness.
So that's the Colorado Communities for Climate Action.
Okay.
And so not to be confused with the CC4CA.
You're right, exactly.
The CCC, Colorado Compact of Communities.
Half a cookie, as my friend Claire C. Carlson would call herself back in
And
high
you know, when
school.
you keep dividing everything in half, it goes on infinitely, doesn't it?
Ooh, Ooh,
I remember that
like
from
it.
ninth grade math.
Anyhow,
So-
back to this meeting that you're having in Aspen. It's next week.
It's next week.
Wow, it's coming up soon.
May 18th and 19th. Effectively, this is the model for this was the mayor's climate conference. And so there was a Paris conference recently, and about 3 years ago, and both Mayor Bloomberg from New York City and Mayor Steve Skadron from Aspen were in attendance there. And Steve Skadron then, basically as a wise observer of all things climate, he decided, you know what, we could actually sort of crib this model, bring it down to our local level. Instead of being mayors that are all joined in this effort of large cities, let's have mayors and managers and council members from small communities like ours, or up to I think our largest partner is clearly going to be Denver, but the Boulder community is also going to be a member of this as well. So the idea
so
is
mayors
that
from towns big and small, cities big and small. Got it.
And the idea is some of us, like Aspen and Telluride, have been at this for multiple decades in some cases. We've been at it pretty diligently for 14 years here. Other communities are just trying to get started. So the idea is to leverage off of other experience that other communities have had, or ideas that they're implementing on maybe a grassroots level that we don't do. So unlike that CC4CA, which is a state level advocacy organization and lobbying our legislature, this Colorado Compact of Communities is really a grassroots hyper-local thing where you and I can decide, maybe this month I'm going to commit not to drive my car, but X number of times. Instead of X plus Y that's a usual in my routine. Or
and then you get to donate the Y to the environment.
Or I will switch out. There's that. Or I'll take some of my available resources if I have some, and I'll switch out all the bulbs in my home to be LED instead of you know, the less energy efficient versions.
Sure. And I noticed signs on the school. Next week is Ride Your Bike to School week.
The school has been a real huge leader in the community, trying to emphasize the fact that, you know what, we do live in a, very small 1.7 square mile town, and the ability of people to walk is certainly there. And I know I'm always running late, but if we just take a few more
biking is
minutes
almost as
and
fast
walk,
as driving.
we actually will be physically better off, and our community and our climate will be better off.
Sure.
So the school's been a pioneer in that effort, and I think that's a real success that they can already point to.
And the school's Hope Club and a lot of the activated students that go here are part of that initiative. It's really nice to see.
So coming out of next week's meeting in Aspen, what the expectation is that these 30-odd communities are going to come together. We're going to make a commitment to each other that within the next 2 years, each of our communities is going to adopt an action plan to make some incremental improvement over what we're already doing. For communities like ours, it'll be trying to compel perhaps more of our entire community to work towards carbon neutrality, and then figure out where we are on that scale now, and then watch in the coming 5 years, let's say. And we're going to report back to each other, and we're also going to steal ideas from each other as appropriate.
That's great.
That's the hope. Then, not only are we going to have this rah-rah, here's our goal moment, but then there are a couple of other organizations that are going to be involved with providing, on a pro bono basis, services to train local town government managers.
So is Greg going to go as well?
Greg is going to be at this
Wonderful.
conference.
That's
Greg
Clifton, the
our town manager.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. The ask of this compact is that we identify approximately 5 town employees, or city employees in the other cases, and we ask each of them to become more of a climate change and climate advocacy specialist in his or her branch or duties. So the town
two
manager,
of you are going to
Public
attend, but
Works,
then you're naming 5 people from this region to help you once you come back.
more or less, yes. We'll try to
good.
tap into and maybe deputize approximately 5 employees of town to do this, as well as some elected officials, I hope, as well. But the idea is then in the next year or so, as we're trying to get our goals up and running and start creating results, that we will be able to tap in best practices and knowledge base. There's an organization of climate change officers that actually is an international entity that does series of trainings, webinars, things like that. So we can actually do these things on a regular basis from here, technologically linked, and we can actually then take those things and put them into action. So, and at the end of the 2-year period, then we'll go ahead and report again, to the community as well as to our fellow compact members. I'm pleased to say that our town council decided that the town of Telluride should join the compact. So we're going to join, which means we're simply making a commitment to do something more, and then we're going to define that more specifically thereafter. So.
And the commitment could be to be carbon neutral or to be 100% renewable. Are those some of the commitments?
That is both of those are possible. You know, in our community, as I'm sure you're acutely aware, the renewables side of the equation is a little more limited because our local power supplier has restrictions on the amount of renewables that it can actually allow to feed into its system.
Right.
Now, that doesn't prevent individual accounts, though, from doing their own solar panels or doing other things that they could possibly to do to offset. So what we're hoping is that we can figure out what's you know, Steve Scadron, again, the mayor of Aspen, said, you know, this conference isn't about telling everybody, give up your car.
Right.
You know, you have to just sell your car and you know, be completely a biped.
Yeah.
The conference really is about what's my lifestyle like now, and what can I actually change in my lifestyle that's not too painful for me, but actually has a real benefit to the climate.
Yeah.
And so I think as a world, we're clearly all struggling with changes in climate and more severe weather.
Yeah.
And although we would love it if we got tons and tons of snow, the alternative is if we get very extremely cold weather, then that's more energy usage. So it's kind of this evil cycle where we end up, you know, with these more extreme weather events that cause us to use more energy to keep comfortable, and in the process we're emitting more carbon. So. The idea is let's all do individually at a grassroots level whatever we can, and incremental change can be very powerful and huge.
Yeah. So, you know, I always ask the community questions for the mayor, and this is time for one or two because they're germane to the conversation that we're having now. One is, someone asked, what's the low-hanging fruit? What can we all do to kind of mitigate or to lessen our carbon footprint?
Well,
Each of us individually, you know, would it be biking to school?
We're all, yes. Don't drive your car to the other side of town, for example. Don't go to the post office in your car, walk or bike. Or if you're running errands, just plan extra time and use, you know, your own 2 feet. Do it that way.
What about idling? Like if you pull over at the curb and your car is still running, there's like a 3-minute rule, right?
idling ordinance
I
presently.
think maybe there could be more signage on Main Street. What do you think about that? So people would know.
I actually agree with you because a lot of our community, and this is another sort of hidden fact, because much of our carbon output here is part of our guests' output too. And so,
and if you're just visiting, you're not going to know.
If you're visiting, you don't really have that necessarily that level of insight. So I agree with you, and Bear Balhaka was actually the pioneer of that idling ordinance.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So
Well, we had it in New York City, and it was 30 seconds. You know, and I would tap on anybody's window if they didn't turn their car off. And I did that just the other day on Aspen. David and I were walking up to Judd Wiebe, and somebody was idling in their car, and I said, "Are you going to say anything?" He's like, "Are you going to say anything?" I just went over and knocked on her window. She turned it right off. "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought he was coming right out."
Well, and there's a polite, nice way to do it. And that's,
exactly.
you know, and actually I think people appreciate it because they're like, "Oh, we didn't even realize."
Yeah, exactly.
So
one more convert.
We should, but that's a great example of what we could do individually. Be conscious of it in our own, you know, vehicular use, and also be gently friendly about reminding people.
But maybe signage on Main Street, that's something that...
Actually, that is a good idea, and I think Public Works
exactly. And then what about the houses that are part-time residents that keep their heat or their air conditioning up to a certain level? I wonder if we could have like a meeting with all of the
property managers,
for example. Yeah, exactly. What do you think about that? Has that been proposed before? You kind of finished my question as if you had already thought of it.
Well, no.
And that was something that someone just mentioned earlier when I was saying I was going to be interviewing you. They said, why don't you have a meeting, or doesn't town have a meeting with property managers, turn their thermostats down to, you know, they said 35, but I mean a couple degrees above freezing so that your pipes don't burst, but no higher than that so that you're not heating a home that doesn't have people in it.
Certainly makes sense, and frankly it's a win-win because it's less of a cost for the homeowner when not in residence as well. And the comfort level doesn't need to be as high. We are planning an outreach to both property managers as well as members of the lodging community, you know, the traditional
Renters,
lodging community like hotels. And so the idea there is we can all make other improvements, and that would be one of them.
Okay.
Hotels, one of the ideas that was broadcast at our meeting this week was, well, like in Europe, when you're not in a room, maybe we should encourage hotels to, in the rooms themselves, put motion sensors in for lighting.
Oh, right. So the lights go off
if
you're not there.
If you're not there. So, and that seems like that is a low-hanging fruit sort of thing, I think. I've put them in my house in Brooklyn in the past, and I think they were all of maybe $40 for
Yeah.
switching out each little switch
Yeah.
to be a sensor. So that seems like over the long haul, that's a reasonable investment. So,
Yeah, sure.
but it's little things like that, and it's things that I think we can, leverage off of each other
Yeah.
and figure out, okay, what have you seen or what have you done? And that's part of this idea, is to bring people together in a grassroots conversation, and things like that will come out of it, I hope.
Yeah. Don't you feel like now's the time a little bit? Like we've
Well,
talked about it off and on for a lot of years.
Local action is
but
more
yeah.
important than ever, and I think people are realizing that the primary sphere of influence within their control is really what's going on 3 blocks away and 10 blocks this way and 5 blocks
Yeah.
that way, and really not too far beyond that.
Yeah.
So the
And
sobering reality
since
is
our town is so small, we have a sphere of
you
influence.
have ultimate
that-
control, and lots of citizens
Yeah,
are very aware of
Yeah,
that, and
yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
People are not shy about speaking up and acting, so
Yeah.
we'll hopefully continue to capitalize on that.
Yeah, yeah.
So-
Well, I'm excited about what'll happen at Mountain Film, which will happen before the next mayoral update that we have, where they're going to announce their new normal campaign, and that's a lot of this kind of thing as well, grassroots activism.
One of the other things I was
really
learning
smart
more about
people.
was the idea that at Mountain Film there'll be a table about going solar.
Yeah.
And so there'll be representatives of both solar panel retailers as
Installers,
well as
yeah.
installers. And we're hoping to maybe have a town official there.
Yes.
So that local people who are there and
Yes,
say,
we
hey,
talked to some of your town officials after that meeting that just happened 2 days ago, and they said
so
that
you
they'd
can
be happy
confirm
to.
they're terrific.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
see,
exactly.
you're in the know more than the mayor. So, but that's not a
push-
surprise,
I'm
is
just
it?
helping push the ball up the hill, man. We're all very enthusiastic, and some of us
Well,
have
we're
more
all on the
time.
same side on
Yeah.
this issue.
Yeah,
so
exactly. No,
I don't
it's
know of
great.
anybody who doesn't think this is a worthy
Yeah.
endeavor. And
Yeah.
frankly, that's another idea of, and I asked at the town council meeting, are there any restrictions if you happen to live in the historic residential
Yeah.
zone, microzone, for example, are you eligible to install solar panels? And the answer that came back from town staff was, theoretically, yes, it's just subject to review.
Right.
So Hark would have to, in that case, weigh in and decide whether that was
Yeah.
doing great harm or otherwise compatible,
Yeah.
hopefully with.
Sure. Well, there's these new
Historic
tiles
character.
also that have just been released that actually look like regular traditional roofing. So that could be a good, it's not kind of the above the surface layer now. It's, you could be right on your roof. So that's something new that we're looking into as well.
I've heard about that, but I
Yeah.
don't know if it's available.
It's just now,
commercially
it's
yet.
just become available on the
Okay,
market.
is
So
that
nobody
another one of
has it
Elon
yet.
Musk's initiatives?
Yes, the Tesla
okay.
tiles. Yeah, exactly.
I think that would be actually.
Yeah, so that'd be easier for Hark to approve. But speaking of Hark, one more
ideal
thing
solution.
that I do want Hark to think about and everyone
Sure.
to think about is that the bigger a house is, actually the easier it is to heat passively solar. And so, I think there should be some kind of template for town if they want to approve, Hark or whoever wants to approve a larger dwelling, just to make sure that it has all those measures in it already that are energy saving. Because it actually happens to be easier to make the math work on a larger home.
Well, we
than
did
it
have
is
some
on a smaller
discussion
home.
around the town's building codes.
Yeah.
And we've been in the last, let's say, 3 to 4 years, we've been in the vanguard, so we've been ahead of most of the other communities. There are new international building standards, though, that were adopted in 2015 that are actually farther advanced than ours
Right.
and that are more stringent in terms
Yeah.
of
Making sure
carbon
you put
neutrality.
in,
and-
yeah.
So we are on the cusp, I think, of having our building department adopt these 2015
Oh,
vintage
nice.
standards. There will be a new set every 3 years. This set of standards, this body of rules is updated, and so in 2018 there'll be another update.
Yeah.
But we're in the process of trying to adopt the 2015 level, which
Yeah.
exceeds what we ourselves have been doing. So
Right.
we want to at least stay current, if not be in sync with everybody else at the forefront of that effort.
Yeah.
So building code standards would be exactly something that would dovetail into a new construction project of that nature. Or if you're doing a major renovation or something, then there
Yeah.
would be some applicability to that too.
Yeah.
So yes, that is another way that we can both actively and then passively sort of require
Yeah.
that we have a more sensible building use. I think Councilperson Brown made the point that one of the largest emitters of carbon are actually commercial buildings.
Oh, sure.
And so even though you and I might take steps to do things in our homes, we have a lot of, well, not necessarily Telluride, but in general,
Yeah.
in this country, there are scores and scores and scores of commercial buildings that actually just emit carbon like crazy. So
Yeah.
things like changing out windows, changing out siding, changing roofing material, insulating these buildings that were built in some cases even as recently as 20 years ago that aren't actually all that energy efficient.
Right.
That is another area where individually, if you happen to own one of those buildings or you're part of a group that does,
Yeah,
that's
you
an
could pay
area of
attention
focus
to
too,
that, yeah.
that people should really consider
Yeah,
here
and I
as
think
well.
that's a little bit what Mountain Film New Normal is doing. They're kind of going, business to business, knocking on doors, saying, "What can you do? What have you done? What will you do?" That kind of thing. So it's engaging everyone, the residents as well as the commercial.
Well, we certainly appreciate that effort,
Yeah.
and we are happy to have Mountain Film as a local prominent feature in our town, as well as when it really hits home and it's hyper local like it is this year. This is just a complete win-win all
Yeah,
around.
yeah, it's exciting. So let's talk about slightly
Parking?
more.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Or something else
No, I was
controversial?
going to say no. I mean, first of all, that's not controversial.
Now that we've had
We're
the
just
kumbaya
talking about-
moment
Yeah,
where we can all
exactly.
agree this is a wonderful
Yeah.
thing, we've got to do more.
Yeah, yeah.
How about the thing where I got to take something away from you so I get my parking space?
Yeah, exactly. Go
Okay.
for it. What's that? That's this area right here at the west end of town,
Actually,
right?
both the west end and the east end. The west end from approximately Davis, North and South Davis,
Further
out
west.
to Butcher Creek, although Butcher Creek now has its own microzone at the moment. And then on the east, from Maple eastward within the town limits, is also not regulated. So what we have, actually, let's start with where we've been. The history of this matter is, this goes back about 20 years, that we decided in approximately 1997, hey, the idea of people commuting across town with their cars to the downtown core, 4 blocks away, we don't really want to encourage that. So why don't we put, in that case, put meters on Main Street.
Right.
Then we also had skier parking, and
Right.
we were struggling with that and deciding, we really want to disincentivize skiers from going places other than Carhenge, for example.
Right.
So what we did in that case was we created a zone around the gondola and the depot area, a parking zone, and said, okay, you the residents, here's your parking pass,
Right.
2 per residence, or in those areas where there are businesses, 2 per business, or the public, you're allowed to park in this area for 2 hours, but then you have to move your car. So that then spread to the warehouse district, south of Pacific, to the east of that area. Same regime was done, 2 per residence, parking permits, and 2 per business.
Yeah.
Then we had a problem with cars then creeping
Moving
up
north, yeah.
of Main Street, especially into the historic residential district. So in that case, we decided in year 2000, those first events happened in 97 and 98 respectively, the O zone and the W zone, no pun intended. And then we created the G zone, which is our largest parking zone and spans the residential historic district. In that case, we decided to issue, for reasons I don't understand, 1 parking permit per resident. So you could have a ski bum house with 6 people in it, and you get 6 parking permits,
Right,
which is
sure.
theoretically okay. Now we have a situation where we've blocked off a certain central core part of the town and,
Right.
and limited who can park there and when.
Right.
So we have residents on both the east end and the west end who
Who
have
can't find a parking spot because
trouble finding
people
a
are
spot.
pulling into their.
So the west end
yeah.
is the classic, perhaps like the most extreme example, because you have, since 20 years ago, you've had a change in use in that area of town where you've had a lot of what were designed as hotbeds, multifamily things like lodges that became condominiums. You have that going on in droves in that neighborhood.
Sure. So
you-
people live there full time and need a place to park,
you
and
now
don't
probably
have their own
500 or
driveways.
600
Yeah.
people who are full-time, at least that amount of people, scrambling to try to find a space among the 130 to 230 available spaces depending on the time of the year.
Wow.
So the larger amounts available in the summer and the lesser amounts available in the winter because of
Right.
snow storage on certain sides of streets.
Right.
So we have a situation where now, holy cow, only 1 out of 3 people who live in that neighborhood can actually find on-street parking. And of course, our land use code says that every dwelling unit needs to have 1 parking space. Well, some of these lodges, for example, were built in a day when that was not the rule.
Yeah.
And they're not, outside the law. They conformed with whatever the rule was in that day and age. And so, for example, Boomerang Village was only required to have 2 parking spaces for every 3 units. So
Sure.
that's now
Not
today
enough.
it's
Yeah.
occupied by full-time locals,
Yeah.
and those full-time locals are short 6 or 7 parking spaces then
Yeah.
for their on-site parking. So one of the things that was floated was, shall we create a new zone on the west end, much like we did for Butcher Creek, which was driven more by school traffic and construction traffic last year, but we
Yeah.
tried, and we've done a provisional zone for Butcher Creek, which is the same regime of the public can park there for 2 hours, but then residents can park there indefinitely
Yeah.
as long
With a
as they have
sticker
a
in their
permit.
window or something hanging from
So
their-
when
yeah.
you're stepping back and figuring out, okay, because we have this tension, what are we solving for? Are we just trying to, reserve these 130 to 230 spaces at given times of the year only for local residents? Or are we really trying to find a place for local residents to be able to park, i.e. availability? So if we know going into this conversation that on the West End there is not sufficient availability, then does that beg the question of whether we need to re-examine whether the other zones either have excess availability, for example, or whether it's not reasonable or fair, i.e. inequitable, to treat one subset of our population, let's say the people living in this West End area that's not regulated, differently than people who are living in the historic residential zone.
Right.
Or the warehouse zone.
Yeah.
And so there are inconsistencies both in the number of permits available within the 3 existing zones, as
Sure.
well as the fact that if you create a new zone and you know there's not enough supply, we need to accommodate that demand somewhere. So I think as the lower hanging fruit in this conversation, and which I think you'll see town council have the courage to do, is to adopt simply a new zone on the West End.
Sure.
But the conversation I really think has to include looking at the big picture and deciding, you know what, we actually are all the same in terms of being residents.
Yeah.
I don't really see making artificial distinctions between somebody because they happen to live on North Oak as opposed to South Tomboy Street.
Right.
So in my estimation, I think it's time for us to have a collective conversation about maybe we start with this microzone and over time we start morphing the zones together.
Right.
But
and
then we
making
have
them
people
all
on the
equitable.
East End too that have the same issue. So if we're going to create a zone on the West End, maybe we need to create a zone on the East End first too. Then figure out, in that case, my sort of view of this is we need to accommodate residents first before we accommodate visitors on street.
Sure.
So frankly, those East End and West End unregulated things are poached by visitors from
Right.
time to time.
Sure.
Festival goers, whatever you
Yeah.
have. So the idea is, okay, let's figure out a way that we A, prioritize locals for parking, and B, don't discriminate against subsets of locals with respect to that parking.
Right.
So the conversation is going to continue. This is one of those topics that is a perennial. You're going to have to, there'll be winners and losers. You're going to have to disappoint somebody. You might have to try to take away a benefit that someone enjoys, and we
Good
all know
luck.
how that works.
Yeah.
This is not like taking away your health care.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So let's keep it all in perspective.
Right.
But this is more about, hey, we're all neighbors, and we
Yeah.
really should be treated equally.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Good luck with that.
yes,
Yeah.
come to council.
Uh-huh.
This will come back in June. I think you'll see maybe June, July, more discussion around this topic, and we'll try to find some sort of a fairer and more equitable solution. But let's not be shy about having the honest conversation about
Yeah.
maybe we need a single global zone
Yeah,
within town
what's
limits.
fair, yeah.
And what's fair.
Good. What about the dog thing? Dogs on leashes? Has that come up recently? Is that coming up? I know people have a lot of opinions about that.
I've heard some of those opinions
Yeah,
as well.
no doubt.
It is something that is coming back. The schedule hasn't really been determined as to precisely which meeting, but I would say this summer that topic will come back up. And just for those of you who haven't followed this as closely, we currently have a certain segment of our core, in effect, Main Street in the commercial district, Pacific Commercial District, where you're required to have your dog on leash.
And nowhere
down
else.
South Oak,
Yeah.
down to the gondola.
Exactly.
So, and nowhere else.
Right.
So again, we have kind of a strange system where it's hard for people to know because
Yeah. It's not posted.
it's not posted.
Yeah, exactly.
And then
but
it's,
if you live here, you know.
it's also, the rationale theoretically applies equally to everywhere. Those of us that lived in large cities and everybody was required to have a leash dog no matter what part of the city you were in. I've heard from people who say, look, it's an artificial distinction to even add just the river. The part of the conversation has been, shall we add the river trail to this?
Ah, right.
And the answer to that is, well, we're not entirely sure yet if that's appropriate, if the community wants that, as well as are we just making another artificial distinction, or should the leash thing be expanded to other areas in town? So stay tuned.
So how do
and
people find
speak
out about when that meeting's happening? Because I know a lot of people care passionately about that topic. Do they just look on the town government website, or will it be in the Daily Planet or
the
Kodo?
Friday before each Tuesday town council meeting, so every 3 weeks on the Friday before that Tuesday,
Sure.
the agendas are posted
Okay.
and the full packets are posted.
Right.
I can tell you it's not coming on May 30th.
Okay.
It's not coming on June 20th.
Okay.
So I think it's more likely July and August.
Okay, yeah.
So don't
people
worry
should
until
watch out.
July. Exactly.
Okay, because people do worry. What about sales tax and real estate transfer tax?
actually, we're kind of in the same boat as we were the last time we talked. Sales
Okay,
tax.
let me guess. Sales tax is going up.
Yes.
In 6 or 7%.
It's only 4.5%. I
Okay,
know.
over last year.
Over last year. So
Okay,
the
but
period
last year
from
was
January
up like
1st to March
7%.
31st.
Yeah,
Exactly. The entire calendar year 2016, you're correct, up 7%. This year we're tracking 4.5%
Above last
our
year, which
collections
was
last year.
above 7%.
Correct.
Okay, we're feeling
So
okay
that's
about
kind of
that.
that little engine that could, and we hope that it continues to.
Chug, chug, chug.
On the real estate transfer tax side, it's
Yeah, right. It
highs
depends
and
on
lows.
availability and.
The good news is, at this moment, through the end of April of 2017, we were actually 14.5% or 14% higher
Wow.
year to date
Right.
than we were the prior period.
Wow.
Who
That's
knows
great.
if that'll hold, but
Yeah.
that's where we are.
Okay,
So
we'll take it.
no negatives are
Yeah.
always a good thing.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
We'll take
No,
positive
yeah,
growth.
that sounds good. That sounds good. What about housing? Affordable housing is always a question that the community has, and I know that you guys were going to start working on the
Virginia
Virginia
Placer, actually, we've broken ground and we've poured the foundations for
that's
the
exciting.
apartment components. We'll soon have a temporary bridge over part of the wetlands in order for us to create the foundation for the boarding house. So stay tuned. That project will be ready to go and occupiable by the spring of 2018. So less than a year from now.
Wow.
But you'll see a lot of activity out there between now and then.
Yeah, great, great. Someone else, another question from the community was talking about housing in the central core, retail versus rent, short-term
Right.
rentals. Has there been any
We've-
change in that? Is there?
There's been no change.
Yeah.
Actually, you might remember that back in January of 2017, the Town Council adopted certain amendments to our land use code. Some of those things were designed to limit the residential portion of certain downtown commercial buildings to no more than 35%.
Because it seems good to have a thriving local economy with real retail shops. Is that the
What
idea?
a terrible idea. Yeah, no.
Crazy.
So you
Yeah.
have this tension, obviously.
Right.
Gee, go
Yeah.
figure. Between people who want to live there full time or part time, and folks who want to try to make businesses thrive.
Right.
So there's kind of a fundamental tension that's hard to reconcile. The conversation thus far has revolved around trying to set a bright line, like no more than 35% or no more than X. That's not always necessarily going to achieve the result. We've talked about this before. My business was basically harassed by a little more than 30, but less than 35% of our building
Oh,
at
right.
the location where Arroyo was, the new San Juan building, was not 35% residential,
Yeah.
less than that, and they achieved,
Oh,
a negative
right.
effect on
On the-
vitality and
of the
business
retail.
retail
Yeah,
on the ground
sure,
floor.
got it.
So let's be careful about where you can draw a line and whether it's really going to work or not.
Yeah.
So we have been having a series of conversations at the P&Z level, the Planning and Zoning Commission level, about when should we come back to this topic? When should we consider increasing or decreasing that residential, or should we decrease at all? Should we leave things alone? And I think the answer right now is we're going to leave the amendments we made in January alone for approximately a year. Watch to see what happens, to see if that diffuses some of this natural tension between the residential and the commercial components of downtown. But stay tuned.
Yeah, has the tension been ratcheted up a little bit because of Airbnb and short-term rentals as well? Is that an issue, or is that a separate issue that also is kind of confusing now for people whether or not they can rent their places as often as they might like?
Well, it
you know,
shouldn't
or-
be confusing because depending on what part of town you live in, for example, if you live in the historic residential district, you're limited to no more than
I think you're saying 3 times a year or something, and it could
no
be.
more than an aggregate of 30 days.
Okay, got it.
So we basically, there shouldn't be confusion there, and there is
Okay.
close scrutiny and regulation there. In other parts of town, for example, in the accommodations district, the west end, some of those that parking
Yeah.
zone we just touched upon, that micro zone potentially,
Yeah.
there are no restrictions. So
Yeah.
you could literally rent your place every night if you had for example, I know people who have a rental property on the depot, and
Yeah.
that's eligible for constant rental. So.
It all just depends on what zone you're in, and most people who are trying to do it know where they live and what the rules are.
Yeah,
right?
I would say that's
Yeah.
not necessarily part of the idea whether residential should be allowed, period, or not in a commercial, quote-unquote, commercial area. So, stay tuned.
Yeah, exactly. It's all very interesting. Well, what do you want to talk about that I haven't asked you?
Well, I'm running out of time,
Yeah.
so I should probably jump, but why don't we, since it's off-season, we don't take up too many heavy topics
Yeah.
except for the global warming and
Yeah,
parking.
exactly.
But I would encourage us, the next meeting is May 30th, 2017. The following meeting is June 20th, 2017.
Okay, good.
So I would encourage people to turn out as they, if they're, I assume everybody mostly will be back in town by May 30th.
Yeah.
And we'll go ahead and continue the conversation and let the public tell us what they're thinking. And we'll update the public about, for example, things like the Compact for Colorado Communities, where we are, and help us plan where we're going to get to.
Yeah, we'll have a great time in Aspen next week. Thanks
Thanks
so
very
much,
much,
Sean.
Sarah. It's always a pleasure. Thanks. Bye-bye. Thank you.